Good evening, everyone. Testing. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Policy Committee meeting on Tuesday, May the 9th, 2023. We have a few housekeeping items before we begin. A reminder, this meeting is being recorded on Teams and the recording will be posted on HCDSB's website. Please mute your laptops and use the boardroom microphones when it is your turn to speak. Please use the raise hand function in Teams when you would like to speak, and please lower your hand when your speaking turn is over. Could I kindly request that the land acknowledgement be played?
Halton, as we know it today,
is rich in the history and modern traditions
of many First Nations and the Métis,
from the lands of the Anishinaabe
to the Attawandaron,
the Haudenosaunee,
and the Métis.
These lands surrounding the Great Lake
are steeped in Indigenous history.
As we gather today on these treaty lands,
our Catholic social teachings
call us in solidarity
with our Indigenous brothers and sisters
to honor and respect
for direction, lands, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors
that walked before us.
All these wonderful elements of creation exist,
gifted to us by our Creator God. We acknowledge and thank
the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation
for being stewards of this traditional territory.
Thank you. Let us begin our meeting with an opening prayer by Trustee Powell.
Thank you. In the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit. As we are gathered here today in community, taking a moment out of our busy lives to learn, share, and reflect on the insights, experience, and wisdom of others, we are reminded of how blessed we all are. In the current world around us, there are many who suffer and face grave challenges. We stand in solidarity with them in compassion and by practicing loving kindness to ourselves and all those around us. May we all be well, happy, and peaceful. May no harm come to us. May we also have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome inevitable difficulties, problems, failures in life. May our parents, our teachers, our mentors, our friends, and our community, may all living beings across the world be well, happy, and peaceful. May no harm come to them. May we all have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome our difficulties and problems in this life. We ask this in your name. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Trustee Powell. Okay, moving on. Item number 2. We're going to the approval of the agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to the agenda?
Chair, can I ask a question?
Sure.
We have two parts, the in-camera and the outside. So are we doing the regular one first and then going in-camera?
It's number 11 on the agenda. So if you look at item 11, it's in camera. That's what we'll be dealing with, the in-camera item.
The reason I'm asking is I think the in-camera agenda calls for 7 p.m. So maybe there's a typo there, but that's okay. That's okay. Thank you, Madam.
Are you okay? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Trustee Dort. Okay, sorry. Seeing no additions, deletions, or corrections, may I have a mover to approve the agenda? I'll move it. Trustee Murphy, Trustee Dort.
Second, thanks.
All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, seeing none, the motion carries. Moving on to item number 3, which is declarations of a conflict of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest to declare this evening by anyone? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. Item number 4, delegations. There are no delegations this evening. Item number 5, approval of the minutes of the previous meeting from April 11th, 2023. Are there any errors, additions, or deletions to the minutes of the April 11th, 2023 Policy Committee meeting? Seeing none, may I please have a motion to approve the minutes of the April 11th, 2023 Policy Committee meeting? Oh, Trustee Carabella and Trustee Agnew. All in favor? Anyone opposed? No? Okay, none opposed. The motion passes and the minutes are approved. Moving on to action items. Item 6.1, which is policy I-15 school name selection. Trustees, can I have someone please move that the policy committee recommends that policy I-15 school name selection be forwarded to the May 16th, 2023 regular board meeting for approval. I'm looking for a mover. Trustee Agnew, thank you.
I'll second.
Second, Trustee Powell. Superintendent Bakait, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Trustees, this policy I-15 school name selection was reviewed as part of our regular review cycle. And this policy outlines the requirements for the selection of names for elementary and secondary schools within the Halton Catholic District School Board. The principles have been updated to include inclusive language reflective of our community. There are minor housekeeping changes that have been made throughout, and I'm happy to take any questions. One other thing I wanted to mention, and if you'll notice in the requirements, it refers to policy I-09. And that policy, if you haven't had a chance to review it, is the school accommodation review consolidation closure policy. The reason why we did not review that is that it is still under a moratorium on closures right now. So until we receive further direction from the ministry, we will be holding it. And happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Superintendent Bakait. Trustees, I will now open the floor to any questions. Trustee Saunders.
Through you, Madam Chair. Superintendent Bakait, is there like a roster of names, or how do names get on this list? What's the process? Is there like a, do we ask parents, or what do we do to get these names?
Through you, Madam Chair. Thanks for that question, Trustee Saunders. It is quite a prescribed process, and I'm glad you asked that. The questions do come from the community that will be involved in the new school. So it's definitely organic in nature that it comes from the stakeholders. And our most recent process that we went through was for St. Kateri Tekakwitha. And we have our meetings that review names and the rationale submitted by the community. We shortlist names and develop a priority list of at least 2 names. And for example, we had 4 for St. Kateri. And then we survey the community for the preferred name options. It comes back to the board of trustees, choose the 2 names, first choice and then an alternate choice that is submitted to the bishop. So I can attest to the policy working, and I'm sure Chair Duarte could do as well, because we just went through that process. It was quite, it's quite a rewarding process actually, because the parents are very involved.
Thank you, Trustee Saunders. Do you have a follow-up? Seeing no other questions, trustees, I will now take it to a recorded vote of the main motion here. Trustee Agnew. In favor. Trustee Dort.
In favor.
Trustee Carabella.
In favor.
Trustee Kelly.
In favor.
Trustee Kennedy.
In favor.
Thank you. Trustee Murphy.
In favor.
Trustee Powell.
In favor.
Trustee Saunders.
In favor.
Student Trustee Kuzma.
In favor.
And I do not see Student Trustee Chua or Student Trustee Bowie. So I am also in favor. So this motion passes. This policy will be brought forward to the next regular board meeting on May 16th, 2023. Thank you, everybody. Okay, moving on to 6.2, I-42, which is entitled Out of Province Staff Travel. Trustees, can I please have someone move that the Policy Committee recommends that I-42 out of province staff travel be forwarded to the May 16th, 2023 regular board meeting for approval? I'll move it. Thank you, Trustee Murphy. May I have a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Agnew. Superintendent Bakaich, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Policy I-42 out of province staff travel was reviewed as part of the regular review cycle. This policy describes the terms and conditions under which staff who are acting out their responsibilities as an agent of the board request travel outside of province. And you'll notice in the requirements that it does describe out of province within Canada and also travel out of Canada and the US and the requirements there for approval. Minor housekeeping changes have been made throughout. I'm happy to take any questions that trustees may have.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakaich. Trustees, we'll now move it to the floor for any questions. I do see Trustee Duarte has his hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to bring your attention to requirements. The first two bullets, they seem to be contradictory. Let's take a look at that. So the first one says staff requesting to travel out of province, but within Canada and the US shall require the approval of director. Fine. And then staff requesting travel outside of Canada and the USA shall require approval of the Board of Trustees. So just looking to straighten this out if we can. And yeah.
Thank you, Trustee Duarte. Through you to Director Klein.
To you, Chair. I think it is upon third reading of those two bullets, it is fairly clear to me. It just, I had to go slowly on it, but it is fairly clear. So if one is going to a conference and one is outside of Ontario, but within Canada or within the United States, then it's the Director of Education. If outside of both Canada and the United States, whoever that fortunate person is, they need to have that run through the board.
Thank you, Director Klein. Trustee Duarte, do you have a
no, I
follow-up?
think Director Klein summed it up. It needs a slow reading. So yeah, thank you.
We can put some asterisks.
Slow read, we can add it. Do we have a consensus to add slow read to that policy? Are you okay, Trustee Duarte?
Yes, fine, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I do not see any other questions, so we can take this to a vote. Okay, Trustee Saunders.
In favor?
Trustee Powell. In favor. Trustee Murphy.
In favor.
Trustee Kennedy. Trustee Kelly.
In favor.
Thank you. Trustee Carabella.
In favor.
Trustee Duarte.
In favor.
Thank you. Put your hand down. Trustee Agnew.
In favor.
Student Trustee Kuzma.
In favor.
And I am also in favor. So item 6.2, the policy will be brought forward to the next regular board meeting on May 16th, 2023. Thank you, everybody. Moving on. We'll be moving on to item 6.3, which is II-18, non-motorized and non-licensed motorized transportation safety. Trustees, can I please have someone move that the policy committee recommends that policy II-18, non-motorized and non-licensed motorized transportation safety be forwarded to the May 16th, 2023 regular board meeting for approval. May I have a mover? Trustee Carabella, thank you. Seconder?
Sure, I'll second.
Trustee Powell, thank you very much. Superintendent Bakaich, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Policy II-18 was reviewed as part of the regular review cycle. The associated policies and procedures have been updated to add policy loss or damage to personal items as it is referenced under the requirements, and especially under the principles whereby the the school and the board are not responsible for storage, loss, or theft of damage to non-motorized and or non-licensed motorized transportation equipment. That's a whole lot to describe bicycle safety and skateboard safety. At one time, it was called bicycle safety, so it's a little bit broader now because the students are bringing all kinds of items to school as a mode of transportation. Super fun, but we do account for it. And they don't need a license for these items. So again, just minor housekeeping changes throughout, and happy to take any questions that trustees may have.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakaich. Trustees, I will now open the floor to any questions. Trustee Kennedy.
Thank you. I guess it would be motorized, but what about, those motorized scooters that people have now? Are those allowed? I'm just curious, are those allowed at school?
Thank you. Through you. Go ahead, Superintendent Bakaich.
Thank you, Trustee Kennedy. They don't require a license, and to tell you the truth, I don't know that many students are using them in elementary, potentially at secondary, but that they would fall under the category as long as they don't need a license, which I would presume not, because this encompasses also things like e-bike.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakaich. Trustee Kennedy, do you have a follow-up? No. Okay, seeing no other questions, we will take this to a vote for item 6.3. Trustee Agnew. In favor. Trustee Dwart.
In favor?
Trustee Carabella.
In favor.
Trustee Kelly.
In favor?
Thank you. Trustee Kennedy.
In favor.
Trustee Murphy.
In favor.
Trustee Powell.
In favor.
Trustee Saunders.
In favor?
Student Trustee Kuzma.
In favor.
And I am also in favor. This motion passes. The policy will be brought forward to the next regular board meeting on May 16, 2023. Thank you, everybody. So we're moving on to item number 7, discussion item 7.1. We do have one discussion item this evening, which is policy II-37, volunteers in Catholic schools. Trustee Kennedy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just wanted to go over the purpose and the commentary of the discussion item as on the screen. The purpose to provide an opportunity for discussion on policy II-37, volunteers in schools. Given the numerous discussions and concerns regarding safety that the board and committees have had over the past few months, I'm bringing policy II-37, volunteers in Catholic schools, forward for review and discussion. Furthermore, I'd like to review the current requirements and guidelines and explore additional requirements to enhance safety for students. So as we all know, over the past few months, we've had many discussions and presentations regarding school safety, including the following. At the April 11th policy meeting, there was a discussion item regarding access to school premises, and that was further sent to the Policy Review Committee. Also in April, a motion was approved by all trustees regarding potential enhancements to reduce risk management. There was also a presentation at the CPIC Committee meeting in April about anti-sex trafficking with funding provided by the ministry. Lastly, the recent student census did ask about the feeling of safety at school, and those students, just in particular, one group with disabilities, for example, only reported a 67.5% feeling of safety in our schools. Therefore, I'd like to review policy II-37 as an additional safety discussion regarding volunteers in Catholic schools, as I believe some enhancements could help improve student safety or the feeling of safety and provide more consistency across our schools. I am not recommending any deletions from our policy, but rather some additions or enhancements. So I've reviewed our policy. I've reviewed other school board volunteer policies and would specifically like to compare ours to the York Catholic policy. The first thing I noticed about our policy, it doesn't define what a volunteer is. That may seem self-explanatory, but other school boards do define what a volunteer is. So with York Catholic, a volunteer is defined as a person who is provided with an opportunity to serve without remuneration alongside or under the supervision of a York Catholic District School Board employee and shall not replace any York Catholic District School Board employee. So with the volunteer policy, I think it's best to define the term with some examples of volunteer roles in our schools. Some examples could be we have volunteers for culture nights, pancake days, used uniform sales. Another one could be a parent council. At high schools, there are student representatives on our parent council. They're present in the room, and I believe a volunteer policy should apply to all parent council members. I would also include elementary parent council members as well, since many also volunteer in other capacity with students in the school. Secondly, our policy requires a criminal record check and a vulnerable sector check, but does not require how often a new check should be provided. York Catholic, on the other hand, as well as the TDSB, requires a vulnerable sector check prior to volunteering and once again every 3 years thereafter. So did a little research on vulnerable checks. In a nutshell, a vulnerable sector screening is the background check completed by the police and is required of individuals who intend on working or volunteering with the vulnerable sector. That includes those under 18. A vulnerable person is defined as a person who, because of their age, disability, or other circumstances, whether temporary or permanent, are in a position of dependence on others, or B, are otherwise at a great risk in the general population of being harmed by a person in a position of authority or trust relative to them. And it provides varying levels of information. It's a check that we ask of our volunteers now. It is $30 for the check that is paid by the volunteers themselves. And it is actually, I've done it before as a hockey coach, pretty straightforward. You do it online, you pay online with a credit card, and it actually gets mailed to your house. There's no to it going to a police station at all. So that's really what a vulnerable sector check does. Now, there's certain things that are on the check that aren't, that may come off the check, because there are different levels of offenses in Canada. So on the vulnerable sector check, every criminal offense of which the individual has been convicted, for which a pardon has not been issued or granted, that is on the vulnerable check. However, it doesn't disclose summary convictions if a request is made more than 5 years after the date of the summary conviction. So those are like lesser offenses in Canada. Those wouldn't show up after 5 years. Someone may have made a mistake when they were 20 and now they're 40 and they do a vulnerable check, that wouldn't show up anymore. It was a summary conviction. There's also every criminal offense with the individual has been found guilty and received a conditional discharge on conditions set out in a probation order. Those are disclosed, but they are removed from the vulnerable sector check after 3 years, as well as absolute discharges. Those come off the check after 1 year. So there are mechanisms in there. Again, if there was some past criminal behavior, that will come off the check down the road. After completing this section, after comparing this section of our policy versus York's, and given many recent discussions about safety, I recommend also adopting the 3-year rule or considering that 3-year rule regarding vulnerable sector checks. Further, I recommend we accept these if they're dated within a reasonable period of time before the start of a school year, as in, not accepting one from many years ago for someone who's just starting out now. Something reasonable could be something like maybe like July 1st, we're starting a new school year, not to have ones that are too dated. After that, after a vulnerable sector check is on file, all school boards that I've researched, including ours, do require an annual offense declaration. That is being done at our schools, and I have a copy of that as well. And that's something I would, again, not to delete anything, so that would still be part of the policy, I would think. Lastly, I would like us to consider, as far as, you could also have volunteers that start later in the school year. So there would have to be a different timeline for a new vulnerable sector check, and maybe within 3 months of starting, as an example. Lastly, I would like us to consider a policy what action is to be taken if a vulnerable check comes back and displays criminal activity. I'm not sure what the process is there. Maybe that's an in-camera item, not sure. My understanding is that there are some guidelines. I've talked to a couple parents within our schools that don't allow volunteers to be volunteer or to become a volunteer if there is a VSC that lists any offense for which a pardon has not been granted. Lastly, the reason why I'm looking at this is I believe that, as part of our safety, we've had a lot of discussions. There's many things we can do, and this is just one item I think that we should consider to be more in line with some of the other larger boards and get a little bit of a consistency around it. I believe any criminal activity can affect student mindset, and I hope that we would want volunteers in our schools who have adhered to a highly ethical standard of behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Kennedy. We'll go to some questions, and thank you for that discussion item. Trustee Agnew, I believe your hand is up.
Thank you so much. And not so much a question, but I just wanted a clarification because I do have the York policy here with respect to your initial comment about the definition of a volunteer. So the York one says a volunteer is a person who is provided with an opportunity to serve without remuneration alongside or under the direct supervision of a York Catholic District School Board employee and shall not replace any York Catholic District School Board employee. Ours actually does mirror that if you're using that as an example. So ours says the principal is authorized by the board to assign to a person who volunteers to serve without remuneration such duties in respect of the school as are approved by the board and to terminate such assignment. So we do have a definition of a volunteer and it's quite similar to York. So just, I wasn't sure if that had gotten missed, but it is in our current policy, just as a point of reference.
Thank you, Trustee Agnew. Trustee Kennedy?
So that is under requirements. But under your
Thank you, Trustee Agnew. I see any follow-up?
no.
Thank you. Trustee Duarte, I see you're next in line, and then Trustee Carabella and Trustee Saunders.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to add to the conversation. I looked up the Education Act, which is the topmost tier for guidance, and Power of Boards, Section 171, 1, Para 4, talks about a principal can assign a volunteer to serve without remuneration. So just to add to your conversation, it's in the Education Act definition of volunteer and how you can serve without remuneration. And the principal has to assign that, and it's Section 171, 1, Para 4.
That's in our policy.
That's in the, yeah, exactly, but it's in the Education Act one step higher. So that's all my comment.
Thank you, Trustee Duarte. No follow-up to that?
No.
No, thank you. Okay, over to Trustee Carabella.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did wanted to thank Trustee Kennedy for bringing this forward. I think these are good recommendations. It's for many years now that our schools have been asking for vulnerable sector screening and the police check. So many people are used to it and they expect it. And it gives that layer, an extra layer. And I think that every 3 years, you were saying, what is it currently? No, is it inconsistent or? Okay, so that would be good. And then I had a question so each principal keeps their volunteer list, or is it a paper list, or is it a digital list?
Thank you, Trustee.
I could comment on that.
Hang on a sec. Trustee Kennedy, stand down. Thank you, Trustee Carabella. We need to answer that question. So I'm over to Director Klein to answer that question.
Thank you, Chair. I would really have to get some clarity on that. I think in most cases, principals would have that on site. So they would have that either in paper or within some type of spreadsheet they would have in front of them. They'd keep track of that and they would monitor that through the year or years in the case of most schools. But for staff that has anything to add to it, I think that's pretty clear, having done that many times myself.
Superintendent Bakaich.
Thank you, Chair. I can just add to that. It is listed also in our requirements, but each principal each year will review their volunteer list because they're required to update it because their volunteers are required to complete the declaration and or complete the full check if they're new to the volunteer process. So it's an annual and ongoing list.
Thank you to Superintendent Bakaich. Sorry, Trustee Kennedy.
Yeah, just from speaking with some members, it is paper-based. One had mentioned maybe there's a way, this would be beyond maybe this discussion, to have maybe a central location. If some volunteers volunteer at different schools, it's possible. If they gave it to one school, does it make its way to the school? But it is paper-based, as I've actually put mine into the school and flipped through and found it. So it's just in a binder.
Thank you, Trustee Kennedy. Trustee Carabella, do you have a follow-up?
Not right now.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, Trustee Saunders, you're next.
So through you, Madam Chair, Trustee, I'm just wondering, this to me seems to be like a robust volunteer policy is like a risk mitigation strategy. It's a way that we don't introduce new risk into our schools. So it seems to me a good idea that we have a robust, strong policy because it allows us to avoid, introducing any unnecessary risks into our schools, given that we always talk about wanting to be the best and having the best, doing the best and having, the best policies. I think it's a good idea to have a policy that is in this area that's strong and clear. So I think I support this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Saunders. No follow-up, I would assume? No, thank you. Moving on to Trustee Powell.
Thank you. I have a couple points. I just wondered if you could clarify through you, Madam Chair. You were saying about to consider a 3-year check. Are you saying if they have a current police check on file to do every 3 years a vulnerable sector? Okay. And then if there is, okay, I'm trying to think back. I have so many of them out there, but there's an annual declaration you do. How is that different than the vulnerable sector check? Like you're just declaring that I haven't had anything, right? So that's done annually to every year at the school. You're supposed to put it in the next time you're in the school, right? I've signed those 100 times. Like how much further do you want to do that from that?
Thank you, Trustee Powell. Trustee Kennedy, if you'd like to respond?
Yep. So the annual offense declaration happens anyway. That's basically on your own word that you declare that I haven't had an offense since my last update. Right. Essentially is what that is. A vulnerable check is through the police service, and on their guidelines with Halton Police specifically, they say their guidelines, and the employer will determine which police check is required. Right. But they do mention that school volunteers, they recommend a vulnerable sector check. And just looking at other boards, like I said, York Catholic, the TDSB larger boards, they have a 3-year policy where we don't seem to have one at all. I mean, like technically, I don't know if you could use one for 10 years. There's nothing that says you can't in ours, right?
No, you're right.
Yeah.
Thank you. You do. Oh, thank you, Trustee Kennedy. Trustee Powell, do you have a follow-up?
I do. Thank you. Sorry about that. Breach of protocol there. Through you, Madam Chair, just to say, yes, that you are supposed to do. I guess I'm just naive and think, you say, I declare I haven't done anything. But can I follow up with that? Is that okay?
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I have a concern, and my concern, I want to protect our kids, but I have a concern because I have been in a situation with a family member who it's been 30 years, but they've never gone through the pardon process, right? So for coaching, they'll put their criminal check in and we discuss it, and it's been, okay, it's been 30 years, nothing's been done. This doesn't affect children. It doesn't affect, how do we turn this into not discriminating against? I guess that's my concern.
Thank you.
While still protecting the kids.
And is that a comment, or is that like a rhetorical question? Is it?
I don't know. What do you think it should
maybe
be?
A comment?
A comment? Yeah, I guess my concern would be, how do you do this safely without discriminating against somebody who maybe just didn't go through the pardon process 25 years ago?
And thank you, Trustee Paul. And just for full disclosure, I mean, we have Director Klein and Superintendent Bakaich here making notes fervently as we're having these discussions. These great discussions, they're making notes. So we'll move on. Trustee Powell, a follow-up, or are you good? Okay, good. On to Trustee Agnew.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So I think that, so my question was going to be, as you were speaking, Trustee Powell, was sort of the next step. So in the event that this is going to go through, I mean, there's a lot of questions here that I think are procedural. I envision that there is probably some legalities that would be around some of these questions. And so is the next step to have our policy review committee take a look at this? It is operational in nature. So would it be having our review committee, the policy review committee, take this out of cycle, review it, and then have them come back with any changes as they deem necessary and that kind of stuff? Like what would be, so through you, Madam Chair, I think, what would be the logical next step were we to move this forward?
Thank you for that, Trustee Agnew. And over to Trustee Kennedy. I'll just interject for a minute. We do have 2 other people on the speaker list, but normally what we've done, a discussion items come up and, it's a policy and it's going to be pulled out of cycle. The normal cycle is not now. So So I look around to the Board of Trustees that are sitting here to say, is the flavor to now send this, take this policy out of cycle, send it to the people that it needs to go to for review, and taking into account all these comments that we've heard tonight. So Trustee Kennedy, as you brought up the discussion item, is that your flavor to do that this evening? And we'd have to check with the rest of our trustees.
Yeah, I haven't decided on that yet. I just want to have the discussion today. But if that's the normal procedure, otherwise, it can be an action item for next week, unless there's, like we have another month, or next week, another month. If there's any opinion we need from legal in the meantime, maybe we can get something there.
Trustee Saunders, sorry, Trustee Saunders and Trustee Carabella, would you like to have a comment before I elaborate on that? Because I was just going to say that, you know, what we've done in the past is if there's a flavor to pull this out of cycle, which is what we're thinking, if there's no, if we concede, we all have a consensus that we want to take it out of cycle, that's what we would direct Director Klein to do and his staff, and then bring it back once they vetted it in the proper way. That's usually how it works. So yes, Director Klein.
Thank you, Chair. We could do that and do a full legal review of the policy and the documents that connect to it.
Thank you, Director Klein. Yes, in that, what I just said? Yes.
Yeah, so just a point of clarification, that wouldn't be an action item on the next policy meeting, correct? Like, it would have to go through it would even come perhaps as an information item first. It wouldn't just go directly as an action item. Is that correct? I'm just wondering what happens next.
Yeah, as I wouldn't be vetting it, and it would be vetted through Director Klein and his staff, I couldn't make that decision. I don't have a lawyer present.
Right.
So over to you, Director Klein. I don't know if they can give an actual date without giving a false sense of hope, right?
Chair, you're right. I can't give you a clear date right now. We'd want to get some legal feedback in terms of not just the policy, but the documents that feed into it. As Trustee Kennedy has said, there are other next steps that come out of this, the what ifs. We'd want to get some feedback from that. I would look to Superintendent Bakaich in terms of her thoughts around timelines that would be reasonable and achievable.
Yes, Superintendent Bakaich, please feel free.
Thank you, Director Klein. I think what I'm hearing, Trustee Kennedy, is you'd like more information regarding the allowable restrictions to the eligibility criteria, and then taking into the necessary legislation that informs this kind of policy. So we could provide the additional information so that trustees can make a recommendation on whether to move forward with amending the policy or leaving it as is.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakaich. Trustee Kennedy, would you like to speak to that, or should I go to Trustee Saunders?
Sorry.
Okay, Trustee Saunders.
Just to that point, and in terms of legal advice, so I took the opportunity this week to talk to a lawyer who's a specialist in these kind of issues, and he was telling me that the interpretation of this, particularly with school boards, is extremely narrow, and it's not something that most lawyers would even know. So I'm thinking if we do ask for a legal interpretation, I think we'd have to have an external, independent third party look at it rather than a regular legal approach. I think it's important, and from what he told me, it's an area that's not well known by even lawyers. So I would, if we're going to go that approach, I would recommend that we engage a independent third party lawyer to look at it.
So Trustee Saunders, Director Klein has got his hand up there.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Trustee Saunders. To have a legal opinion on legal opinions isn't surprising to hear, but I would say that we do have some very good legal experts to whom we call upon on occasion, and I would have every confidence in them, because this is not just volunteerism. This is volunteerism in the context of the Ed Act and in the context of schools, and so those would be the people that we would go to on that.
Thank you. Trustee Saunders, can you please wait till I address you, please? Thank you so much. Thank you, Director Klein. Trustee Saunders.
Yes, sorry. In all due respect, I think that this is something that I think as a trustee, I would feel more confident if we, rather than relying on our regular legal advice, we would get somebody who is specialized in this area. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I think I would prefer to hear from somebody who works in this every day and can give us a sort of the best opinion available. So that would be my request.
Thank you, Trustee Saunders. I'll move over to Trustee Carabella.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had my hand up to just talk about the process because, so I'm just wondering in the past too, perhaps from a discussion item, it has come as an action item with some amendments. Did that not come straight from the trustee? I don't think we always went to like a committee or
I'll speak to that and maybe Superintendent Bakich. My understanding, Trustee Carabella, is because this policy, anyone can bring it up for review, absolutely. But because it's being pulled out of cycle, we need to give it to the Director of Education, who's through our governance policy, who's in charge of the policies and vetting the policies and procedures, and then bring it back to us as we do in the policy committee with amendments, suggested amendments, who they've spoken to, how they vetted it. So that's my understanding, Superintendent Bakich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Trustee Carabella, you're right when you say that policies can come forward with the suggested amendments from trustees. That can be the process as well. And we would still vet it through a legal review, given the documents that are affected and with a focus on the allowable restrictions. This is governed by legislation such as the Ed Act has been referred to already, Human Rights Code, the Criminal Records Act, and Police Record Checks Reform Act. So these are policies that are very dependent on the law, as Trustee Saunders has referred to as well. So we would want to make sure that what we're doing is actually allowable. So as a next step to answer that question, Trustee Kennedy can bring forward the policy out of cycle with suggested amendments, and we would review.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakich.
Sorry, can I just have a follow-up clarification?
Sure.
So that means that Trustee Kennedy would be providing his suggested amendments to this point to bring it back.
Thank you, Trustee Carabella. Superintendent Bakich.
That's correct.
Thank you, Trustee Carabella. Next in line, I see Trustee Agnew. No problem. Trustee Kennedy.
Oh, sorry. So, as far as, action taken if we do get, or what our policy would be if we have something on the vulnerable sector screening, what we do about that, given what it says is on there, versus the other item, which I think is more in line with other school boards, much larger boards, about at least having something in place that I don't know if we need legal on, is to request a vulnerable sector check every 3 years. So these are two different things. And I think we can probably move something forward with that. And then legal might take many months. And then in addition, we could change the policy about what we do if something is on those screening checks.
Thank you, Trustee Saunders. Director Klein.
Thank you, Chair. I would suggest that there are a lot of moving parts in this, and this would be something that we'd want to look at holistically rather than attack it one point at a time. That would be my view.
Thank you, Director Klein. Trustee Saunders, your hand is up.
Yeah, just something came to my mind through you, Madam Chair, is, we can look at situations where, Trustee Powell brought up 30 years ago, but we can also look at the other extreme where we have someone who's guilty of a heinous crime and 10 or 12 years from now gets out of jail and just happens to have, members on the trustees who were friends and go, that's not such a bad crime. So I don't think it's this board's job to be deciding what is and what is not, a criminal offense that we're prepared to deal with. So I don't think we should be looking at the extremes and deciding what's in between and what do we like and not like. So I just want to say that I don't really think we should even be going there saying, this was a long time ago and it was okay. This is more heinous. I just don't think that's where we should be. I think we should be relying on the legal advice that we get. So.
And thank you for that, Trustee Saunders. And that's exactly the point that I was trying to make, that we will take the policy, which has associated procedures to it. We will give it to the experts at our staff that will vet it and go to the experts that they feel they need to go to make sure that we have a very solid and secure and safe policy for everybody, because that's our job, is not to protect the board. So that would be my response to that. Do you have a follow-up to that, Trustee Saunders?
No, but I sort of do like what the recommendation was for Trustee Kennedy to bring it forward rather than spend a lot of time. Like let's get the advice, let's move this forward, and let's make a decision. Because I think if it disappears in a committee somewhere, we may never see it again, especially with no deadlines and stuff. So I think something that moves this forward quicker is better.
Thank you for the comment, Trustee Saunders. Trustee Kennedy.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So our policy right now doesn't say anything about if there's anything on the vulnerable sector check. So really that could be an addition, but what it does say is that a volunteer over the age of 18 will be subject to a criminal record check and a vulnerable sector check. What I'm looking to do is to say every 3 years is really what I'm looking to do. If you want to go further with legal about, I don't know how many vulnerable checks we've ever gotten back that actually have an offense on them. I would imagine next to none, given, absolute discharges and conditional discharges come out after 1 and 3 years respectively. As Trustee Powell was saying, there could have been something many years ago that could have been a summary conviction that wouldn't be on there anyway, right? I don't know if we've ever experienced that before. From the folks that I've talked to, some principals, they've never seen one with an offense. But as far as the policy is really just quite vague. You have to be subject to this check. All I'm asking for is to say it has to be dated within, like, every 3 years to renew the check, and add something in it that says, as you provide, it has to be dated within the past, say, 3 months. And we don't want checks that are old. And then after that, every 3 years. Just to, that would align with other boards, and that I don't see how that would require legal. It's not just by doing things piecemeal, but that's what we have in our policy now.
Thank you, Trustee Kennedy. So I'm just trying to get clear. Is there an actionable item that you're discussing? Because I wanted to thank you to bring it forward, and like we had done with some other discussion items, I've kind of gone around the room and see if we have consensus to, one, pull it out of policy, and to send it to the Director of Education for review. Is that what I'm hearing? Or I think that's what I'm hearing, but please correct me if I'm wrong. It's a bit of both.
I would say maybe to pull it out as far as, if we're going really deep, if there's something on the check, what happens? That would be, whether that's in the policy or not, I don't know.
Which, Trustee Kennedy, would be procedural, right?
So that wouldn't be in the policy.
It would, but it would be under our, so the procedure is operational, which is in Director Klein's hands. So he and his staff would have to figure out procedurally, how do you tighten it up? If that's what we're asking them to do, right? The policy itself, even the comment about 3 years, Director Klein, that kind of dips its toes in the operational procedural as well, does it not?
It does. And I think policies evolve with time. And I think even the volunteer policy, which goes back many years, probably 20 years at my memory as a former principal, has evolved over time at boards as well. So you're right. They do. One does inform the other.
So I guess Trustee Kennedy, Trustee Carabella, you have a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Something like a timeline, like annually or every 3 years, I think is, or every 3 years, general, some timeline like that can be put into a policy. And then the details are in the procedure. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can be both places. That's what I have experienced with. Okay.
So for what I'm getting from that, and I'm speaking to Director Klein and Superintendent Bukaj, is that it sounds like some of us are requesting that a timeline be implemented in the policy. That is the request that I'm hearing from some trustees.
I think, again, we're heading into that zone of procedural and policy. So we're heading into the timeline of how often you would do this, then it would be, when would you do this? Superintendent, Trustee Kennedy, you noted even in terms of, well, the what if somebody arrives partway through the year and begins that, now you're really in the tall weeds of procedural. I think if we were to have a fulsome review of this, it would help us with not only policy, but also with a procedures that come up with it. They are inextricably linked. And to take one part of it and say, well, let's just modify this. My experience, not only as a director, but in other areas as former superintendent, is that they all somehow connect. And so it's good to have a holistic view of it. And I would reiterate that the law firm that we would be going to on this is recognized as possibly the top 1 or 2 in the province of Ontario, used by many other boards, likely the 1 or 2 boards that were cited earlier as having policies that are, in your view, Trustee Kennedy, as being very good or ones that are admirable. So.
Thank you, Director Klein. We do have a speakers list again. I'm going to move on. Trustee Kennedy, can I move on to Trustee Powell and Trustee Murphy? Oh, okay.
Sorry, that was me. I was like, oh, you're calling me.
Okay, Trustee Kennedy, you're number 1, but could I go to Trustee Murphy? She has not spoken yet. Thank you, Trustee Murphy.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. I get that the, policy versus procedure thing is, there's kind of gray areas, but I'm just thinking if I was a volunteer and I needed to know what I needed to have to be a volunteer at a school or with the board, I would like to know if it needs to be 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. Like, I think that's important information to be on the policy versus procedure. It's just the comment I would like to make.
Thank you, Trustee Murphy. Duly noted. Superintendent Bakich.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of bring us back to the distinction in the process. So currently what is required if you're a new volunteer is you're required to complete the vulnerable sector record check. That encompasses also the criminal record check. And it involves and includes the sex offender registry. So it is all encompassing for our purposes. And there is true, Trustee Kennedy has pointed out, there's a $30 cost to that. Once you're a returning volunteer, you complete the volunteer criminal offense declaration form. I'm assuming that everyone has seen it, but did I have that back here? I just wanted to describe what we have. So on our form, if you're not familiar with it, it has 2 points of declaration. So one, you say, I have no convictions for offenses under the Criminal Code of Canada, up to and including the date of the declaration for which a pardon has not been issued under the Criminal Records Act, or I have the following convictions for offenses, at which point, yes, it's true, we're requiring the volunteer to act in good faith. And I'm sure you've all completed this. If it's in the case where there is an offense or a list of offenses, the volunteer is required to complete that. That's done on an annual basis. The procedural component isn't a procedure per se, it is guidelines. There's a parent, volunteer in Catholic schools parent guardian guide that describes more fully the requirements, including this. And then there is an internal document for administrators that is a lot more fulsome. So in terms of what Trustee Kennedy is proposing, a change to the timeline, that would be something that, and I, not to comment on any other board's policies, but to say that it is a common practice to have absolutely the vulnerable sector check and then the declaration form annually. If it's the will of the committee to make an amendment to add a timeline to that vulnerable sector record check, then that would be an amendment that Trustee Kennedy or whomever would bring forward to policy committee for review. And we have made reference though to what our requirements would be in terms of ensuring that, and again, I don't want to say anything about any other board, but ensuring, since we're making a change to our policy that we've had in place for, I believe it's since 2007, we would have, I think it would be prudent for us to conduct a legal review of our policy and the associated guidelines that go with it, because we want to make sure, I think as Trustee Powell had noted, that we're doing what's in the best interest of our students, but also the people that come to the school to volunteer, because I don't know if you had a chance to review, but in the principles, we're very clear about volunteers being valued partners that help foster positive relationships. They're encouraged to contribute to the extracurricular program. We do require them, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of you have done, that they assist staff in the daily operations of our schools. And that can be in reading groups, that can be at fun activity and community events like barbecues and whatnot. So, you know, we want to do the best for all and to ensure safety. And I appreciate Trustee Kennedy bringing that forward, because number one, we promote our Catholic values and encourage a safe and inclusive environment. Having said that, though, we want to make sure that any changes that we bring forward are based in, you know, and are in alignment with the legislation.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakich. I do have Trustee Kennedy on the speakers list, number one here.
Sure. Yeah, like, I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's really no solution to all these problems. It's really just trade-offs. Offense declarations, as an example, they just say, have I been convicted of an offense? An absolute or conditional discharge is not a conviction. So someone could sign that with an absolute discharge and they wouldn't be lying. However, that would show up on a vulnerable sector check. And so I think, you know, we're talking about safety. I think we owe it to our students to ask for these more often and not leave it. So we have one of the weakest policies I've seen. I don't see why it would be so difficult to ask for this every 3 years, given boards much bigger than ours. Obviously, I've gone through this process and they ask for it every 3 years.
Thank you, Trustee Kennedy. Trustee Murphy.
Yes, not to belabor the point, just one last point of clarification. So if I was applying as a new volunteer now, and I handed in a vulnerable sector screening that was, say, 5 years old, would that be accepted?
Thank you, Trustee Murphy. Superintendent Bakich.
Sorry, just to clarify, Trustee Murphy, did you say you're a new volunteer? Yeah, brand new. No, you'd have to go through the process of the volunteer record check.
But what would the board respond? Would they say we need it up to date? And what qualifies as up to date?
So would you be a new volunteer?
Yeah, I'm a new volunteer. I want to start next week. I have a 5-year-old vulnerable sector screening. Would it be accepted?
So you'd have to demonstrate. So if there's a new volunteer to the school, they'd have to demonstrate that they've got a volunteer sector record check.
Yes, but they're dated. So in my case, what would the board say to me, this is too old, can you get a new one? It was 5 years old. So
Yes,
then
correct.
so then based on what requirement?
Do you mean the timeline?
Yeah, like
that's
they're dated,
that's dependent on the for us, it would be the Halton Regional Police. It does take some time, but they will, what we have found, if an individual is telling them that they want to volunteer in a school, they're pretty good about getting it completed. It just still has to go through the process. It's
Right,
not
but
like
let's say mine's an old one. It's dated from 5 years ago. Would it you'd say, can you please go get a new one, correct?
current one.
Dated
correct.
within what time?
Especially a volunteer new to the school, new to my school as the principal, correct?
Thank you, Superintendent Bakich. Trustee Murphy, do you have a follow-up? No, thank you. Okay, moving on to Trustee Saunders.
Yeah, what my concern is this would go into sort of policy committee, it sinks down, disappears, you know, eventually it comes back up, and all we get as trustees is, you know, we reviewed it, it's okay. And we don't really get that opportunity to be involved. So I'm thinking whatever process we use, I would like something where we have, you know, a lawyer here can be in camera and we ask them the questions and we get the answers that we need. So rather than just sort of a bit of a black hole, you know, we've got the answers right in front of us. So whatever, you know, however we make the policy work, whatever we have to do to make that happen, I think for me, I think some of our other trustees, that would benefit us because I think we would now be intimately involved in the process and we would hear the answers directly. So
thank you, Trustee Saunders. I think I'm going to ask Superintendent Bakich to speak to the process of policy committee and policy review. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Trustee Saunders. I just wanted to review the process. So when a policy, we have our regular review cycle. Policies are reviewed every 3 years. So you'll notice, actually, if you look at this policy, it was reviewed in March 2022. And so the process is when the policy comes forward for review. In this particular case, it would come with amendments. It would go to the policy committee. This isn't in a month, Trustee Saunders. And then it would be reviewed at senior admin, and it would come to policy committee.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakaich. And you know what I also found, Trustee Saunders, and to everybody else, there on the Halton Catholic District School Board, there's an actual process, a flow chart that says if yes, when I was first the policy chair, I spent a few days trying to memorize that flow chart. It was helpful for me.
Yeah, and just through you, Madam Chair, I don't think the issue is so much the policy, it's interpretation of policy. And I think that's where, we as trustees need to be involved because, the policy can sit there and it can be interpreted. And I think that's where we have to be involved. So again, however this works its way through, I think it's absolutely critical that we be here involved in the discussion of how this thing is going to be interpreted. So.
Thank you, Trustee Saunders. Director Klein has a comment for that.
Well, my understanding is the process that we're proposing here would allow us to come back. And so trustees here at this table could ask questions around it and proffer some form of addition or revision to it, having gone through the process where we'd have, again, one of the top legal teams in the province to look at it. And they would have probably been, again, connected with other boards as well. I'd ask Superintendent Bakaich to maybe give us a sense of, in terms of timeline around that, because we wouldn't want things to sink into the waves or whatever, what that might look like.
Thank you, Director Klein. Superintendent Bakaich.
Thank you, Chair and Director Klein. So Trustee Saunders, yeah, I can assure you there is no black hole because we have a very vigorous cycle. So the policy committee here with all trustees is where you would discuss the amendments. So the work of preparing the policy takes, like for an example, the month. So right after board meeting, once these policies are approved, then we start again. And the next policy meeting is June. Drew a blank.
In June.
Thank you. June 13th. We have quite a list for June 13th. However, if it's the will of the trustees to have it come forward for June 13th, we would try our best to Trustee Kennedy would provide his amendments to the policy and we would go through the cycle in preparation for June 13th at the very earliest.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakaich. I'm going to move on. We have a few more people on the speakers list. Trustee Powell, Trustee Kennedy, you're up there, but Trustee Powell, oh, not anymore.
No, I will. I just,
okay.
So fast.
Oh, thank you.
You're
Okay,
welcome.
Trustee Powell.
Through you, Madam Chair, I just want to comment on Trustee Murphy. Because I just went over this in the school last week. And so when it was 3 years old and they said we need a current police check on file. And it was go to the board or go to the police online, do it, and you have to submit it. They actually couldn't go to the field trip because they didn't have a current one on file. It was over 3 years old.
That's all I'm saying. Like, what if it was 2.5 years old?
It's
like,
old.
I'm not-
That's not current.
okay.
Today.
So current is
Like this month, current. What do you call current? Sorry, but
The
I didn't know
guideline
that,
is
but-
within the past year.
no, because
Okay, hang on. We're doing too much cross
Sorry.
table talking, please. So Trustee Powell,
As
do you have a follow up?
chair of council, school councils, we've gone over this and it was, yes, current had to at least, like it had to be within the last month or so of, it couldn't be, even if it was May and it was from September at a different school. No, you had to have a current one for that school within the last month or so.
Thank
That's my experience on councils.
Thank you, Trustee
Anna.
Powell. And I do feel it in my heart to go speak out loud. Please make sure that we're talking generalities here. The minute we start talking about specifics, we're going in camera. So please be careful that we're talking generalities. Trustee Carabella.
Thank you, through Madam Chair. So sorry, just for clarification on dates and stuff. So one idea is that this policy goes to the committee and then it comes back in June with work that the committee's done, keeping in mind the amendments or things we were spoken about at today's meeting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Carabella and Trustee Superintendent Bakaich and Director Klein. That is the intention, right? If the will of the board is to pull this policy out of cycle, and that's us making that decision, then Director Klein will take that policy and vet it and bring it back to us for review. Now, we've had a very fulsome discussion, so I believe a lot of this information has been written down by Director Klein or Superintendent Bakaich as far as kind of what some of the trustees are looking for and kind of getting a feeling for what changes we want to make or specifics we want to make. So if anyone's opposed, can we have a consensus that we want to take this policy out of cycle and move it to Director Klein's responsibility for review? Or do we have anyone opposed to that? If we have someone opposed, we'll go to a vote. Trustee Saunders, you're opposed to taking this policy out of cycle for review. So you don't want to review this policy? So thank you, Trustee Agnew. But Trustee Saunders, that's not how the process works. Unfortunately, we have to send it for policy review. They bring the documents and then we look at it and we suggest amendments, or we agree to disagree, or we vote it down, whatever the case may be.
Okay.
So I understand your comment, but that's not the process.
Yeah, but what I don't want to happen is, again, we come back, we've got legal advice, it's okay. And like, I mean, I would like to, at that point, have the legal advice here that we're discussing it with, like that. That's how involved I think we should be. I think that's how important it is. So if we do come back on the 13th, I think we need the lawyers, hopefully Director Klein can give us, who these lawyers are, what their experience is, and then we have that opportunity to work through that process.
And thank you, Trustee Saunders, but I must say with all due respect that the Director of Education, John Klein, is responsible to keep us out of legalese or legal issues. So I was sure he takes that job very responsible, would not put us in any situation where we would get sued and not use proper legal advice, but your comment is well taken.
Yeah,
Director Klein, do you want to comment to that?
And to the director's point earlier, he said that there can be different.
Trustee Saunders, I'm sorry, but I'm asking Director Klein if he wants to respond.
Thank you, Chair. We're going to engage again our lawyer, the lawyer that we've gone to in policy reviews before, and we're going to seek full feedback from that legal expert, and we're going to look at what other boards do, and we're going to talk to other stakeholders in this, not least of whom are the principals, who are really at the coal face when it comes to this policy. And then we'll come back with the revisions as needed. And I have faith in that, and I have faith in the team that we work with to get that done.
Thank you, Director Klein. Trustee Saunders, do you have a follow-up?
Well, yes, just to sort of reiterate saying that there are different opinions. And I think that this could be one opinion, and we could have other opinions. And I want that fully explored. Like, I don't want just to be kind of, here it is. And then, as a board, we're given the option of yes or no. So I think that, and I don't think any of us are on this policy committee, the director's policy committee. So again, we're kind of separated from this process until the very end, when we're given sort of a final product and said, here you go. So I don't want to be in that situation. So.
Thank you, Trustee Saunders. And there is a policy working group. Superintendent Bakaich could go over the definition of the working group, but we are the policy committee right now. This room is the policy committee, and then there's a policy working group. Superintendent Bakaich.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify again, Trustee Saunders. The policy working group is the principal stakeholder response. So they review the policies and procedures from the operational lens, because they're the ones that activate and put in action our policies and procedures. But I wanted to be clear, trustees all sit on this policy committee. So any changes or updates or amendments to the policy is the work of this committee, where you would have your input.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakaich. I see a new hand up, Trustee Duarte, and then we should probably make a decision.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just listening to the conversation, I just want to assure trustees, all trustees, that we always use legal, which is specialized in the Education Act. They do only Education Act, and I've used many times as chair, and they know the ins and out of Education Act, which what Trustee Saunders said, other lawyers would not know. Okay, so Education Act is very specialized, and we use that thing. So I would assure trustees that the law firms that we use for purpose of policies when we have several of them, couple of them, and they are very specialized. You're going to get a detailed information. Second thing, I just want to make a note, Madam Chair, is the governance policy clearly says that it's the role of the Director of Education to take the policy to legal. And that's where I think Trustee Saunders, we should look to Director for integrity and getting it done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Jort. And truly my commentary, I think we're all in this for the right reason. And thank you, Trustee Kennedy, for bringing this policy forward as a discussion item. You have a comment?
Just a question. Are we able to ask who's on the policy working group? Is that like who are any trustees in there? Or the trustees aren't allowed on that?
Thank you, Trustee Kennedy. Superintendent Bakait, you could
One
speak
of
to
three
that.
questions.
Thank you, Chair. That's made up of principals. This is the policy committee made up of trustees. So,
Thank you. Sorry.
Made up of principals.
correct. The policy working group is made up of principals, but the trustees have the final say. Trustee Kennedy.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakait. Do you have a follow-up, Trustee Kennedy?
Well, it's more for Director's client comment. So when you go to legal and legal gives an opinion, will we get the raw data of opinion from legal written by them and not your comments about what they spoke, but will we get their actual opinion? Will they write it out for us, for trustees to review?
Good question, Trustee Kennedy.
Thank you,
Director
Chair.
Klein.
In the case of where we're doing this full review, yes.
Perfect. Another question, Trustee
Lastly.
Kennedy? Of course.
Lastly, for Superintendent Bakait, just what I did mention earlier, just briefly about parent council, would you consider, I mean, you're a volunteer, as chair or, sorry, superintendent of volunteer policy?
I feel like I'm the superintendent of everything
Right.
with policy.
Superintendent of everything. Just wondering, I just mentioned that, just wondering, would you consider members of parent council to be volunteers?
Thank you, Trustee Kennedy. Superintendent Bakait.
May I? Yes. Yeah, just to clarify further, members of school council do not receive remuneration, so they are volunteers.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakait. Okay, fellow trustees in the room. So can I go forward and ask, do we have a consensus that we'd like to pull this policy out of cycle and send it to Director Klein and his staff for review? Trustee Kennedy.
Sorry, Madam Chair, can you give us, that's a great option. Can you give us, is that the only option or are there 2 or 3 options? That might be missing something. So that's one item we can vote on. Are there other items? Or is that the only option here at this point? Or are there others for, say, for the next policy meeting?
Well, I think, and I'll speak to it personally, I mean, the first step is you wanted to bring it up for discussion, so we've had a great discussion. All kinds of items have come up. So now Director Klein and his staff will take all of these items and bring it to his staff for review. And then we'll come to us at the next policy meeting with this policy amended, and we can ask questions. Who did you vet it through? And what do you think? And no, we don't like it and we want to make an amendment. That's kind of what we do. So is this really what we should do right now? My personal opinion, yes. But it's up to all of us to agree.
Sorry, point of order.
In addition to that, is there?
Sorry, point of order? What's
Yeah,
the point of order, Trustee Saunders?
Just sorry.
No, sorry, Trustee Saunders, what's the point of, like, is there a bylaw that's been broken?
Well, no, it's
And that's not a point of order. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
a point of privilege.
Point of, what's your point of privilege?
So, Superintendent Bakait mentioned there were several options. So this is one option, and I think we'd like to find out what the other options are.
Okay, and thank you, Trustee Saunders, but a point of privilege just for everybody is if it's too cold in here, you can't hear whatever, that's not a point of privilege, but thank you. Superintendent Bakait.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, Trustee Saunders, so there's really 2 options here. One remains as a discussion item, and we don't move forward with amending the policy. The other is that you propose that we amend the policy and you would provide your proposed amendments in addition to what we've discussed here for the next policy meeting, if we can actually get that accomplished for the next policy meeting. But it sounds to me that that's what your hope is.
Thank you, Superintendent Bakait. So Trustee Kennedy, you understand, right? You would send the amendments to them?
So do you mean get accomplished, you mean get the legal advice within that time? So barring legal advice doesn't come back, is there still an option for trustees to make an amendment to the policy? That is an option of the policy committee at any time. Am I right? As an action item?
The policy is here as a discussion item, not an action.
For,
item.
no, for next.
For the
another-
next policy meeting?
Right, or the one in September. As an example.
It would have to come up as an information item, I believe. No? Correct me if I'm wrong, make me wrong, go ahead, yeah.
Well, I don't want to make you wrong, but I'll
That's
just
okay.
clarify. So yes, it would be either the June meeting and then the next meeting would be September. So based on the discussion here, I am presuming that you want it to come forward for the June meeting, which is the last meeting of this school year.
Well, it would be nice because we're starting a new year.
Yeah.
But barring we don't get that information, is the policy committee allowed or to have a vote in June on certain amendments to the policy without, or must legal advice be obtained first before any amendments to this policy? That's the question.
Chair, if I can, Trustee Kennedy, we would make it all in conjunction so that we're making the most accurate amendment. So we're going to try our very best. And trustees will be notified, I'm presuming by Director Klein, if we can't make it within that, for that next meeting, but we're going to do our very best to make it for the June 13th policy meeting.
Thank you, Superintendent Bukaj. And remember, everybody, because we have all these policies that are in cycle, so every month, Superintendent Bukaj and the team have to prioritize all the different policies to make sure that we're dealing with them in a timely manner. There's been other policies that have been deferred to us to take a look at. So trust us when we prioritize in the will of the trustees. So moving forward, can we get a consensus of what we want to do here? Do we want to take this policy out of cycle? Is there anyone opposed to that? No? So we're in favor. It's a consensus. We all agree that we're going to move this policy out of cycle and send to Director Klein and his staff for review. Based upon, and then amendments, anybody has any suggested amendments, please bring them forward. An email, I guess, would be the best thing. Superintendent Bukaj? Okay. Okay, we're good? Final call. Okay, so moved. Thank you, Trustee Kennedy, for bringing that forward. That was a wholesome discussion, that's for sure. That was good. Thank you. Okay, moving forward, item number 8, information items. Item 8.1 is an administrative procedure provided for your information. This was already approved at the May 1st, 2023 Senior Administration meeting. Item 8.2 is upcoming agenda items for the June 13th policy committee meetings. These items are included for us as information regarding agenda items so that you can do some homework before the next policy meeting. Any questions? No. Trustee Kennedy, here, just, yeah, drop your hand. Okay, thanks. Item 9, miscellaneous information. We do not have any miscellaneous information at this time. Item number 10, correspondence. There was none submitted. So now we move to item number 11, which is an in-camera item. So I need to have a motion to move in camera. May I have a mover?
Madam Chair, we need to clear up the room and make sure that those.
Right, but can I have a move and seconder before we move in camera? It hasn't been moved or seconded yet. So we're not officially going into in camera.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm what? Say that again. May I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Oh, thank Trustee Powell. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay. Now we'll take a minute and move in camera. Let's take 2 minutes. Okay. Yep. So we're returning to the regular policy committee meeting. Item number 12, motion to excuse absent committee members. So we have absent tonight, student trustee Bowie and student trustee Chua. May I have a mover? Trustee Carabella, seconder? Powell, thank you, Trustee Powell. So all in favor? Anyone opposed? No one's opposed. Moving forward. Okay, anyone, item 13, adjournment, closing prayer. May I have a motion to adjourn? I don't see anybody. Okay, Trustee Saunders, you can have it. May I have a seconder? Trustee Carabella, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Perfect. Thank you. I now ask Trustee Saunders to end the meeting with a closing prayer.
So I don't have anything fancy, but in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those trespass against us.
against
And
us.
lead us
And
not
lead us
into
not into
temptation.
but
Amen.
deliver us from evil. Amen. Amen. Father, Son. Thank you, everybody. Be safe and healthy.